Hi, welcome to our webinar today on preparing for the surge in Chapter 7 filings. My name is Dan Garrison. I am an attorney and one of the founders and co-managing partners of Fresh Start Funding.
And I'm Matt Hartley, also an attorney and one of the founders of Fresh Start Funding.
So before we get into the substance today, I want to deal with a few just housekeeping issues. We're broadcasting on Zoom, and for those of you who are not familiar with it, there are a couple of different functions that you'll need to be aware of. We will take some questions and answers at the end of the presentation. So you can click on the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. You can type in your question at any time during the presentation when it comes to mind, and we'll get to those things at the end of the presentation. We have a record-setting registration for this webinar today. We had nearly 300 folks sign up today. And so there could be quite a lot of questions. We'll try and pick the ones that we think are going to be the most helpful to the group at large. You're certainly welcome to follow up with us after the webinar, and we'll have some contact information for you if you have questions that we're not able to answer. But we are super excited about the level of interest, and I think it's indicative of why we thought this was a good webinar topic. There is just a lot of interest out there right now in consumer bankruptcy.
Yeah, there really is. So actually, before we start here, I think we should probably give a little background about who we are. We already gave you our names, obviously, but Dan, it's easier to talk about somebody else than yourself, so I'll talk about Dan. But Dan's been practicing for 25 plus years, came up through the big firm practice. He was almost always in bankruptcy, but was focused primarily on commercial bankruptcy. He's been involved in cases across the country. He also, though, did have a consumer practice as well, did quite a few consumer cases. But Dan speaks nationally, always has. He's recognized as a top bankruptcy litigator in the country, and brings a lot of expertise to the table.
Thanks, Matt. So Matt Hartley also has a very impressive resume. He's been practicing 27 plus years. He started out his career at an international law firm and really was a big law guy and a partner in real estate and finance for a number of years before he recognized his entrepreneurial bent, kind of before I did, and went and grew and ran a number of companies before deciding that he wanted to start a consumer bankruptcy practice. And Matt started a firm here in Arizona that within just a couple of years, he grew into the largest consumer practice in our state and one of the largest in the country. He was filing over 100 cases a month at one period of time. We'll actually talk about how his origin story is kind of the origin story of Fresh Start Funding, in that after the Great Recession boom in bankruptcy filing started to taper off, Matt discovered Bifurcation, and that led us collectively to decide to start Fresh Start Funding a few years ago. And maybe that's a good segue into talking about why we started Fresh Start, Matt.
Yeah, actually, I'll let you take the cue on why we started, about the system being broken.
Sure. Yeah. So really, Matt and I had a realization in the latter stages of our careers practicing as bankruptcy attorneys, and that is that the consumer bankruptcy system is kind of fundamentally broken when it comes to Chapter 7. We have this counterintuitive proposition that at their point of highest distress, we should expect consumers to be able to come in and prepay what is for them a pretty substantial amount of money to hire an attorney to represent them in the Chapter 7 case. And most of them are not in a position to do that. And in fact, the Consumer Bankruptcy Project, which periodically kind of studies the system, just in the last 2 years finished one of their studies and concluded that debtors are languishing longer outside of bankruptcy than they ever have before, and doing it at great personal and societal cost, actually, going without food, medicine, healthcare, other necessities. And at least one of the factors that leads to this is that they struggle to access the system, and largely because they can't afford to hire an attorney. But paradoxically, representation is super important to their success in the system. The statistics demonstrate that almost 100% of debtors who have representation succeed in getting their discharge. But if they go it alone and they file a case pro se, 30 to 50% of those debtors don't get to the finish line for a whole host of different reasons. But representation is key. And so we've got this strange paradox that they can't afford to hire an attorney up front, and we require them to prepay for Chapter 7. But if they don't have an attorney, their chances of success are greatly diminished.
Yeah, we've all been in that situation. That potential client comes in, they talk to you, you determine that bankruptcy is their best option. And then you turn to the question of finances and you say, great, I can help you. I can make all this go away. All I need is $2,000. And then you get to see the look on their face of, how can I pay that? I can't pay that. So
And this creates challenges for attorneys too. So, nationally, the statistics are that only about half the people who sit down with you for a consultation end up engaging you. And some of you may be doing better than that, and some may be doing a little worse. But on average, 5 out of 10 folks that, schedule a consultation and meet with you will engage you. A lot of times they'll tell you, thanks for your time. This was great information. We'll think about it and get back to you. Sometimes they're more explicit about the fact that it's a money issue, but we can tell you from experience that almost all of the time that they walk away, it's because they can't see how they could possibly pay you the fee that you need to be paid to represent them in the Chapter 7 case.
Yep.
And, if attorneys try to do this on their own, there's some unique challenges there too.
Yeah. So, as attorney, if you're not getting paid for a year, you have cash flow issues, you have the payment management issues we discussed. It's just, it creates a lot of challenges for your firm. Plus it's the technical know-how, having the right forms, because bifurcation, you have to do it correctly or you can get in trouble. But we address all of those. So at Fresh Start Funding, we do provide law firms with a line of credit. We do payment management, so we manage all the payments that are coming through. We provide credit reporting for your clients so that you can be the first to help them rebuild their credit. It's great in that initial consultation to talk about how you're going to benefit them in the long run. And then we provide all the forms and training that you need and your staff needs to do this correctly.
And then, sort of the cherry on the top is that we also make sure that you are protected from unwanted scrutiny. And so, if you get an inquiry from a panel trustee or from the United States trustee about the practice, we will step in, help educate the trustees about the practice, about your relationship with us. And if it actually does mature into some sort of a motion or proceeding in front of the court, we'll handle the briefing. I literally will jump on a plane and fly out to argue the case for you, including taking it up through appeal if that becomes necessary. And we put our money where our mouth is. If you were in the unlikely event to get ordered to disgorge some fees in a case and you followed our best practice recommendations about bifurcation, we'll indemnify you for up to $50,000. We just want to remove any sense of risk. And candidly, as we'll talk about, the conversation around bifurcation has changed just enormously in the last 12 months. It's become far less a question of whether you can bifurcate and instead a focus on how you bifurcate, which is where we spend a lot of our time.
So let's take a step back and talk about what bifurcation even is. So the whole benefit of bifurcation is allowing debtors to make payments after the case has been filed. If you didn't do this correctly and you just did a single agreement, collecting those payments post-petition would violate the automatic stay and ultimately the discharge injunction. And so how you bifurcate correctly is you have 2 fee agreements with your client. One that's signed pre-petition and a second one that's signed post-petition. Pre-petition, you do the minimal work to get the case filed. And then after it's filed, the client signs a second agreement, agreeing to the rest of the work necessary to complete their case, and also allows you to collect payments. So the idea is that post-petition, you're collecting fees post-petition that's solely for post-petition work. None of it's for pre-petition work, just post-petition work. And it's all pursuant to a post-petition agreement. So by signing it after the case has been filed, it's not subject to the automatic stay. It's not going to be discharged in the bankruptcy, and it creates a binding obligation that you legally can collect fees on.
Now, one of the questions we get pretty commonly is, how does zero down work as opposed to low down in bifurcation? Because you can bifurcate either way. So some attorneys, they do the analysis and figure out the value of their pre-petition work and the value of their post-petition work. And they actually do collect fees from the debtor up front. They just try and minimize that by pushing as much work as they can into the post-petition period. Noting, of course, that you have to do your diligence pre-petition to make sure that, when you sign off on that petition with the debtor, that you've made sure they're eligible, made sure it's in their best interest, and tried to uncover any landmines that might exist out there. But for attorneys that want to actually offer a zero down, the key is that they have to still allocate value to the pre-petition work. They simply waive those fees for the debtor so that the debtor can get their bankruptcy filed for zero down. And then they allow post-petition payment terms for the post-petition fees themselves.
So again, in zero down, you're not collecting post-petition money for pre-petition work. You're just waiving any fees you'd be entitled to.
Yeah, and it turns out to be one of the issues that's developed in the case law, which maybe is the next topic we ought to talk about. A lot of attorneys have questions about how has this practice developed and what's the state of the case law.
And we could talk about this for probably a couple hours. There's a lot of case law going back 25 years, but we'll try to summarize it. And we have more detail I have lots of details actually that we can share with you and webinars that are specifically about the case law that we recommend you watch if you have more interest. But for now, Dan is one of the top experts in the country on this. He'll summarize this as quickly as we can so we can move on with our presentation.
So the short version, the Reader's Digest condensed version of the history of bifurcation goes back about 25 years. And starting in the mid-90s, attorneys felt around trying to find a way to give debtors the ability to pay post-petition payments for attorney's fees. And early efforts were not terribly successful. Courts generally shut down attorneys that were taking post-petition or post-dated checks and things like that. Starting in 1999 with a Ninth Circuit decision called Hines, there was really kind of a watershed change where there was a recognition that you don't really earn fees for work until you do the work. And so there needed to be a way that you could collect the value of the work that was actually being done post-petition. For another several years after the Hines decision came out in 99, attorneys continued to kind of flail around looking for a procedurally correct way to do this. And along the way, a number of courts commented that there probably was an easy solution to this, and that was by using separate engagement agreements for the pre- and post-petition work. But most of those statements from the courts came in dicta where the attorneys had done something differently, and the courts essentially said, hey, numbskull, you can't do it that way, but if you had done it this other way, you'd be okay.
Yeah, the good news is a lot of that dicta came out of circuit level cases. So
it did, yeah.
Nice.
So there was great guidance, and finally in about 2012, the modern practice started to coalesce. And I'm kind of jumping over a lot of case law history here and getting to 2012, where attorneys tried different ways of skinning the cat here. But in 2012, there were two cases that came out, one in the Middle District of Florida and the other one in the Eastern District of Michigan, that confronted an attorney actually splitting an engagement into two separate agreements, honoring the distinction between pre- and post-petition work, reasonably allocating fees between the two agreements, properly disclosing to clients what they were doing and getting informed consent, and properly disclosing to the court what they were doing. And in both those cases, the Clark and Washington or Henry Walton case in Florida and the Slavin decision out of Michigan, the courts uniformly said, this is a practice that works. It's allowed under the bankruptcy court and it's allowed under the rules of ethics. So those were kind of a watershed point in the history of bifurcation. And then for another several years, what you saw is an evolution in the case law where attorneys tried to bifurcate correctly, sometimes did it technically properly, and other times not so much, sometimes failed to disclose and so forth.
But the good thing about the mistakes, it creates case law that gives us guidance on the right way to do it. So. Yeah,
it turns out that the case law actually has a very clear roadmap now about what you need to do to bifurcate correctly. Waters got a little bit muddied in about 2016. There was another company that entered the market trying to accomplish what we're now doing by using a factoring approach to financing, which some of you may recognize as a problem because most jurisdictions look at factoring as being fee sharing because you're actually selling your receivable to a third party and giving them control over the relationship. But the other problem that this company had was that they didn't educate attorneys properly about how to dot I's and cross T's to technically bifurcate cases, how to disclose, robustly to clients and to the court, and also didn't give them some good cautionary advice about what I'll colloquially call the pigs get fat and hogs get slaughtered problem, which is while bifurcation does allow you sometimes to raise your fees and get you out of the price war that a lot of you are trapped in right now by insisting that clients prepay fees, some attorneys went out and immediately tripled their fees and things like that and got a lot of unwanted scrutiny around that. The company's no longer around, as it happens.
But the good news it also gave us, though, again, more good case law talking about disclosures, particularly disclosures to the court, because the bankruptcy code doesn't really seem to require a lot of disclosures, but the U.S. trustees think there should be a lot of disclosures on this. So we have all those disclosures that we share with our people, and it's really helped to make sure we're doing everything correctly.
And actually, one of the articles that we published in the ABI Journal over the last year and a half dealt with that topic specifically. We wrote an article on undisclosure in the July 2019 issue of the ABI Journal, which we were very pleased to see recently got picked up by the ABI for their Best in the Year consumer republication that I think is available on the ABI website now. But we've kind of dialed in the case law, worked with outside ethics counsel to figure out how to distill that roadmap into an easy step-by-step kind of a process for folks that want to offer properly their clients' post-petition payment terms.
Yeah. Well, Dan, let's talk about the more recent cases that have come out, because they've really helped a lot.
Yeah, so we mentioned that the conversation around bifurcation has just changed enormously in the last 12 to 18 months. We'd like to think part of that had to do with the outreach and education effort that we started in June of 2018 with the first article we published in the ABI Journal. But in April of 2019, there was a decision that came out of the bankruptcy court in the District of Utah called In Re Hazlitt that's gotten a lot of press nationally. It showed up on the ABI's newswire. It's been discussed in articles and has been the topic of many panel discussions across the country. And in that case, again, the attorney did everything the right way. And Judge Anderson in the District of Utah went through an analysis and concluded that where it's in the best interest of the debtor to be able to make post-petition payment terms, and where particularly the debtor makes that choice, knowing that they can either prepay at one price and pay perhaps a slightly higher price to pay over time, where they're given adequate disclosures and they give informed consent, where the fees are reasonable, where the disclosures to the court are adequate, and where the technical aspects of the bifurcation have been done correctly, there simply is no problem under the bankruptcy code or under the rules of ethics to offer clients a bifurcated Chapter 7 solution.
And the good news, that's not just our opinion that Judge Anderson's right, because the U.S. trustees agree with it as well. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, so, Clifford White, who many of you know is the director nationally for the U.S. Trustee Program, was speaking to the annual convention of the National Association of Bankruptcy Trustees in Denver back in August of 2019. And he gave a lengthy speech that's published on the DOJ website. We've got a reprint on our website. But he spent a pretty fair amount of time talking about the Hazlitt decision. And Mr. White said, that there had been some prior cases that they'd gone after attorneys who were bifurcating cases for making some of those classic mistakes that we talked about. But one case that they had not prevailed in was this Hazlitt case. And while you could tell there was perhaps a bit of sting that they'd lost the case, Cliff White went out of his way to commend that decision as being particularly well-reasoned and really kind of laying out the factors that the U.S. Trustee Program looks at when they decide to challenge a particular attorney's bifurcation practice. And he not only commended it to the U.S. Trustee Program, but commended it to the bar at large as being a very well-reasoned analysis of, the bifurcation practice. So you can imagine the stir that caused nationally when Cliff White spoke about that.
Yeah. And then just this year in January, then we had the Carr case come out of the, I think it's the Eastern District of Kentucky.
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah, so that was also a great case. It dove into all the issues raised in the past by U.S. trustees with bifurcation. But this one was a little different than Hazlitt because it really addressed the ethical issues. So the rules of professional conduct were thoroughly reviewed in connection with bifurcation and collecting fees post-petition. And the court there blessed the practice as well.
Yeah, and a lot of the analysis that came out of Hazlitt and in Carr talks particularly about the ethics around offering limited scope representations, or the idea of offering a limited engagement pre-petition and then following it up with a more robust engagement post-petition. And a lot of you may know that many districts have some version of a local rule that deals with this issue. And both those decisions do a good job of distinguishing the traditional concerns with unbundling, which is really just a colloquial term for limited scope representations, from the practice of bifurcation. And Judge Anderson in the Hazlitt decision does a really good job of pointing out that the policy purpose behind unbundling rules is to make sure that debtors have the benefit of counsel throughout the entire Chapter 7 process, and that bifurcation really serves those same purposes. The intent is not to offer a more limited scope of engagement, but in fact to structure the engagement in a way that allows the debtor to be able to hire the attorney for the entire Chapter 7 case where they couldn't afford to prepay the fee before the case is filed.
Yeah. One thing I guess we should have talked about is, all the upcoming bankruptcies and what's happening in the economy.
Yeah.
We didn't really talk about that much. None of us can predict the future, but there's certain things you just can't ignore what's happening right now. Obviously, there's a huge amount of people across the country that are having to file for unemployment. I think the most recent one was 22 million people. Yeah. We've had the statistics on people paying their rent late. I believe it was around 30% of people across the country. Again,
in the month of April, yeah.
Just for the month of April, an unbelievable number. We all see it in our communities. We see how businesses are shuttered. Most of us are working remotely. And just, there's just people are going to get really hurt economically by this, and nobody knows how long it's going to go. But there's no question there's going to be an increase in filings.
No, and I mentioned this at the beginning. I mean, we were very pleased to see the amount of people that signed up for this webinar. I mean, we typically have, 100 people or so sign up for our webinars, and we had about 300 sign up today, which I think is indicative of, people's general expectation about what's coming. And, another interesting little anecdote, we were talking to our friends over at NACPA the other day and learned that over the course of 1 week, just a couple of weeks ago, they had 300 new members sign up for NACPA, which is just astounding. That's as many people as generally show up for their annual convention, and that was all new signups in 1 week.
Yeah. So getting into this Corona crisis, we had record consumer debt. We had record high delinquencies and car loans. Just the economic factors for consumers, even though there's a strong economy by a lot of measures, a lot of consumers were getting themselves into trouble. And when you look back at, recently there's been about 500,000, about 500,000 consumer bankruptcy cases being filed in the country. And after the Great Recession, it peaked to a little more than 1 million cases. So basically at around a 50% level before the COVID-19 crisis hit. But when you look at the numbers of people who are affected right now by this, I mean, it has the potential to be just a massive increase in bankruptcy filings. And trust me, we don't wish this to happen. I hope there's not, but you can't ignore the data that's out there in terms of what potentially might happen.
Yeah, and we had an interesting conversation just before the webinar about the idea that this may come in a couple of different waves. There's a lot of pent-up demand right now with people sheltering in place, and I think most of the folks who are watching the webinar today would agree that their offices, if they're there at all, have been far less busy over the last several weeks than they'd been before. And it's not because there weren't people that were already in pain and needing assistance.
Yeah, so we call it the mini surge. So all those people that needed to file before the crisis hit, but aren't able to now for whatever reason, they're going to come back when some of the restrictions are lifted. So there's going to be the sort of instant increase in filings that's going to happen, but then that's going to be followed by a much larger increase in most people's opinions. And so we really all need to be, as bankruptcy attorneys, need to be in a position to help those people, because it's great to grow our practices and make some more money, but at the end of the day, most of us are in this to help people, and there's a lot of people coming in. They're still going to have the same problems that they had before, which is coming up with the money to pay you.
Yeah.
And so by having, the zero down option or low down option for your clients, you're going to retain so many more people and help so many more people.
Yeah, our entire company is premised on the idea of doing well by doing good. We talk about the practice of bifurcation and the services that we offer to help attorneys do that as being sort of the win-win-win. It offers a solution for a debtor that needs immediate help and needs the relief of a bankruptcy filing, offers you the chance to grow your practice and to really do well by doing good, helping more people. And it relieves the burden on the system of folks, trying to do it on their own as pro se debtors. And all of the problems that we talked about at the outset of the presentation that drive only half of the folks to, who meet with you to engage you, we have every reason to think are only going to be worse over the next several months or longer with the current unemployment situation, and depending on how quickly or slowly the economy starts to ramp back up.
Yep. So let's talk a little bit maybe about the benefits to debtors of our program. So obviously the big benefit for most debtors is the ability to retain you, hire an attorney. The other benefit is they get hired right away. Because traditionally, if someone comes in and they don't have the money to pay you up front, you'll put them on a layaway plan. And with a layaway plan, they're going to end up making payments to you. And in my experience, sometimes it goes for years. But some period of time, but they have to wait. So even though the creditors may be crashing down on them, they're still not going to be able to get filed. But with zero down or low down, you take away that problem, so you benefit the debtors in that way. The other benefit is that attorneys that work with us in our program, debtors get 12 months post-petition to pay their fees. So whatever the fee is you charge, when you spread it out over 12 months, it really ends up being a very manageable payment that most people can afford. So again, they're very grateful that rather than come pull that money up front, it's a very small and easy payment. And they also get to make it after they got the benefit of having their bankruptcy filed and stopping most creditors from taking actions against them.
Yeah, it's always seemed a paradox to me that, we've all been sort of forced into taking layaway plan payments for bankruptcy, because the central thing the debtors are looking for from us is relief. And of necessity, many of us have had to hold that relief hostage to getting ourselves paid, because otherwise, there wasn't a way for us to make a living helping people but with Chapter 7 bankruptcy. But this is a way to really create, again, that win-win scenario where you have a way that you can be paid for the work that you're going to do, and they can get the one thing that they most desperately need, which is that relief.
Yeah, the other benefit we mentioned earlier, but I'm going to say again, because it really is a great benefit for the debtors, is that when they make payments through us, we report their payments to the credit bureaus. So it helps them rebuild their credit right away. And again, it's a selling point you can use in your initial consultations with people, but it's also just a benefit they're really going to appreciate as they go on, because every day that comes in, whether they're successful or not in terms of changing their lives around financially, they all intend to rebuild their credit. They all have dreams, it seems, to acquire a house or a car, or a better house or a better car. So they all want to improve their credit. So it's super important to them when they're looking to file bankruptcy to know that you're going to help them with that.
Yeah, and maybe this is an apropos point to talk about our payment management process, because we do get a lot of questions about that. We are not a collection company. We are a relationship-based payment management company. We manage the payments that are owed to you as your agent, and we do it with a very human face. We have a welcome call with every debtor that comes through our system to make sure that they understand who we are and that we're collecting the payments that are owed to you. We reemphasize that positive messaging around the fresh start and getting them back on their feet, and really use the credit reporting as a carrot, not so much a stick, because within the bounds of the rules that we have to live by, we go out of our way to report positively for these debtors. And so when someone gets off track with their payments, which a lot of folks do at one point or another during the payment process, our folks are talking to them and reminding them that this is part of that fresh start that they were looking for. And the messaging is always, how can we help you get back on track? Very human process. It's had to become even more so recently with a lot of the unemployment and underemployment that's out there right now. And I can tell you, with the 370 odd firms that have signed up with us in 46 states and the entire portfolio of receivables that we manage for attorneys, we're very successful at collecting the money. And, the alternative is really one that's not very attractive to attorneys. We talk to attorneys who try to manage payments themselves, and we hear anecdotally that they're collecting 65 or 70% of the money, and we're able to collect over 90% through this relationship-based approach that we have. Yep. So from that perspective, candidly, the service basically pays for itself if you want to offer post-petition payment terms to your clients.
Yeah, for sure. So I guess let's talk a little bit more about the benefits to attorneys that work in our system. One we've talked about already some, but it's worth mentioning again, is just the increase in the percentage of people that you retain that come to you for that initial consultation. Again, 50% is the normal average, and attorneys that work with us, they report back to us that they retain anywhere from 70 to 80 to 90% of all the people that come in their office because they have that option. And again, when you work with us, it's not like you put everybody into our program. It's just an option. So people can pay up front, fantastic. If they can't or prefer not to, put them in our program. But we encourage all of our attorneys to just give your people two options. Let them pick.
Yeah, and actually from a legal and an ethical perspective, that is the surest way to make sure that you are dealing with the debtor's best interest and you're getting informed consent, because who knows what's in their best interest better than the debtor themselves. And so, among many tools that we have, one is a one-sheet summary that we advise attorneys to use that basically says, look, if you have the funds to prepay for the bankruptcy, here's the amount that you'll have to pay for me to represent you throughout the entire process. In the alternative, if you don't have the funds to prepay, or you would prefer to get in quickly and make payments over time, here's the cost of doing that. Here's the payment structure that I could offer to you. And I'm indifferent. You can pick whichever option better suits you. And in fact, the case law recently that's talked about informed consent has highlighted the fact that presenting a clear choice to clients and letting them pick which option works best for them is the surest recipe for getting informed consent.
Yeah, as part of our training, we'll really teach you how to do that, how to determine your fees, how to present them to clients. The training really goes in depth on that stuff. Let's talk about some of the other benefits that may not seem as obvious to attorneys with offering a zero or low down option. So your marketing. So most attorneys are doing some form of marketing, digital marketing, mailers, whatever it may be. But across the board, the marketing experts that help attorneys and attorneys themselves all report that changing over to a zero-down messaging increases the effectiveness of their marketing dramatically. And so that effectively drops your cost of your marketing too. So you need to think about your cost of your marketing per, per client that you ultimately get to come in and hires you. And so your cost of your marketing will go down on that basis on zero-down marketing, because people like that. I mean, again, we talk about this. They don't have the money to pay you. So your marketing is more effective. More people will click your ads if you're doing ads. More people will show up because they're not worrying about payment. And then when they get in your office, more of them are going to retain you. So it impacts all levels of your sales funnel to get people to hire you.
No, and it does it because it's a differentiator. I mean, all of us have struggled with being trapped in a price war in consumer bankruptcy. Unfortunately, the notion of a fair market is that you have a willing buyer and a willing seller under no constraints. But the idea that we're requiring people to prepay a fee when they're in financial distress is by its very nature a constraint. And unfortunately, what that leads us to is a commoditization of our services, where we get trapped in these price wars. And the only way that you can try to differentiate yourself from your competition is to lower your price. And it's unfortunate because there are so many great practitioners out there that are really trying to give a personal touch and that are highly qualified and want to do a great job for their clients. But unfortunately, most debtors aren't sophisticated enough or in a good enough financial position to select the quality of the representation over the price of the representation. So if there's somebody down the street that's charging $100 less.
And just graduated from law school or something.
Yeah. And so this is a way to differentiate yourselves and really put the conversation back on the quality of the services that you provide and the experience, and the education and the know-how that you bring to the table.
Yeah. So another benefit that I was really surprised to see in my practice, but now I understand it, is that when I offered zero down, my referrals started going through the roof. Now, all of us rely on referrals and they're great, but my referrals went up dramatically when I started offering zero down. And as I started talking to people, I realized we're getting lots of referrals from friends and family and coworkers. And so what was happening is people were in financial distress. They knew other people were in financial distress. They talk about it at work or at home with their friends and family. And the people who also need to file think they can't afford it, and they hear about zero down, they call. I mean, it was always exciting when we'd get into a company and we start getting all these calls from people working at the same company, all wanting to come in and do a zero down bankruptcy. It's very, very exciting. And again, we're helping people.
Yeah, and honestly, that's just a dividend on an investment that you've been making for years, and it becomes a more profitable investment. All those people that you help become word of mouth advertising for you, and because this is still relatively new in a lot of markets, it's just a huge opportunity to differentiate yourself, and people are going to be very grateful that you have an option available to them that doesn't require them to continue languishing.
So we were really concerned about getting this all within 40, 45 minutes, and Dan raced through the case law to make it happen, and we actually found ourselves with a little extra time here. But let's talk about maybe how you guys can get started with us.
Sure.
It's super easy. Even though our people are working remotely, and we actually are in our office today, we decided we'd come in.
This is, by the way, one of the questions that's been lobbed in so far is, can I wear a mask with this mustache? And I actually just shaved off a huge beard. For those of you who've attended previous webinars, you know that. And yes, I can. And I'm your Huckleberry.
So Dan's lucky. Actually, I was looking at how I could do a survey on this webinar. This is Dan's quarantine mustache. So I was going to put up a question as who likes and dislikes. And my view is that most of you would say you don't like it. Dan's view is you would all love it. So. Yeah,
so but in all honesty, we have had the entire company work remote now for a few weeks, and this is the first time Matt and I have actually been in the same room in 3 weeks now. But we had such an interest level in this webinar that when we thought about doing it remotely in the split screen and everything, we decided that both of us having been kind of quarantined for a few weeks, that we would come in and present this together. But it's no laughing matter. I mean, the fact is we take this very seriously, and we've been able to keep our systems running very well with remote teams. As you can imagine, we're on Zoom calls morning, noon, and night with our folks, helping to manage things and keep the trains running on time. And I can tell you, for those of you who may already be working with us that are on the call, and I know that a number of you who are watching the webinar today actually already are clients, we've really been able to keep things going without missing a beat throughout this entire crisis.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so the good news then is also we can get you all set up. So even if you're in a state where you're not even going to office at all, now's a great time to get signed up, get yourself and your staff trained. We can do it all, even though our people are working remotely, it's all set up to go. So signing up is super easy. We have a contract you sign with us, and as Dan mentioned earlier, we have what we call our Lunch and Learn series, which is our training videos where we buy you guys lunch, followed up with live Q&A with people from our office to help get you going. And then we have a whole follow-up process to help you get all your documents in order, get your systems in order, whether using Best Case or Encompass or Next Chapter, or whatever you're using, we'll help you with all that. But it's a super easy process.
Yeah, and we've really worked hard over the last few years to dial in all of the forms, disclosures, client engagement agreements, and things that you need in order to adopt this practice and be right in step with the best practices recommendations from all the recent case law. We work with an outside ethics counsel who's a national authority on ethics, who helped us to make sure that we vet all the issues that could be out there, not only in terms of how we structure the financing, but the disclosures we make to the clients and the courts and so forth. And that library is at your disposal. We have a partner success team whose sole mission in life is to stay in touch with you, make sure that your practice is growing, that you're getting this integrated into your practice appropriately to maximize its benefit. We also have a quality control process where on a quarterly basis, we're taking a look at a handful of your filings once you start working with us to make sure that you don't fall into some of these, ethical traps that some attorneys in the past have by failing to do this correctly or to make proper disclosures and the like.
Yeah, so we have lots of tools to help you in your practice. And one of the things we're going to offer up at the end of this in the final slide is a document we put together that deals with the initial phone call that you get from your potential debtors. I mean, most attorneys don't really think about the sales funnel or a sales process or closing a client because it sounds so horrible. But the reality is you have to. I mean, you still have to determine that you represent them as in their best interest, you found their bankruptcy is in their best interest. But once that's been determined, there's nothing that says you can't have more of a sales approach to this. And so what we have is a really interesting document. It's just 2 pages, but it's really dense. There's a lot of information about how to handle that first call and get them to come into your office and retain you. And then we also just have a lot more tools that when you come into the Fresh Start Funding family that we'll share with you that you'll really appreciate.
Yeah, and we really go out of our way to offer comprehensive solutions to our clients. Even though we talk about the financing and the payment management side of this a lot, what we offer is really an integrated suite of services to try and, optimize your success. And, a lot of these other things like the marketing side of things and your internal sales funnel and things like that, there's no additional cost for any of those things because candidly, your success becomes our success. To the extent your practice grows and you're able to help more people, our company grows as well. And so we take that holistic approach to everything because fundamentally our company is about making a fresh start affordable and accessible to everyone. And the best way to do that is to help folks like you to adopt this great alternative into your practice to help more people.
So if you have questions, one is you can post them up right now. And we have one question here I'm going to address. You also can call into us because one of the questions here, it sounds like a perfect question for us is, how do I get started? And how you do get started is we'll have a phone number at the end you can call in. Our people are available. They'll give you much more details on the program, answer any questions you have, and get you all set up into the program.
Yeah. We also have one kind of housekeeping question. It looks like at least one person may have shown up late to the webinar and wonders whether or not they can get a copy of it to watch it later. And we will have a recorded version of this webinar available on our website. And you can certainly reach out to us at the phone number that'll be on the last slide to let us know that you'd like to get that. There will be an email that goes out to everyone that attended as well that will have a link back to the webinar if you just want to review some of the information.
Yeah. And actually, there's an interesting question here. There's really 2 questions I got put up, and they both deal with disclosures to the court. And I guess one question is about, if you disclose just the pre-petition fee, I believe, or just the post-petition fee, and is it ethical to only disclose one? And the answer is easy on that. The answer is you disclose both. The Form B-2030 that most of us use, and there are some local versions of it, but they're almost all the same. They all contemplate a disclosure of the total amount you're charging, how much you've received before you file the form, and how much the client still owes you. So what we've done, part of our disclosures, is we've greatly expanded that form. And so we have a series of paragraphs actually that you add to it that discloses to the court everything. Tells them about us, tells them about how you're doing your practice, tells them about the payments the debtors are doing. We want to be completely open with the court so that they know, exactly what you're doing. And of course, disclose really with the court and with your client.
Yeah, the title of our article that we published in July of last year in the ABI Journal was There's Never Too Much Information. Disclosures in bifurcated and finance Chapter 7 cases. And you can go to that. That resource is also available on our website, and you'll see all of the disclosures, and it'll give you an idea of our approach. But Matt hit the nail on the head. It's disclose. Because it turns out, for the attorneys that got into some hot water at different points in time in the case law, that was the one common factor that existed. And I think every single case was that the attorney had failed to properly disclose to the court what was going on. And we could have an interesting...
Many times put the wrong dollar amounts on the form.
Yeah, all kinds of very silly and avoidable problems too. But I will tell you that not only is this the most avoidable problem, but we really go well above and beyond what's actually required in that disclosure. And we could have an interesting intellectual conversation about what Section 329 and Rule 2016B actually requires in Form B-2030. But the simple fact is there's no downside to over-disclosing, but there are huge perils in failing to disclose. So we can walk you through all of that, and we've got the forms, as Matt mentioned. Yep. So Robin asks, how would you suggest protecting clients from the onslaught of personal injury and other unqualified attorneys from enticing debtors through massive advertising to file with them? Well, as we said, offering a zero down or a low down solution, offering post-petition payment terms is really a way to differentiate yourself and make the conversation more about your qualifications. And the fact that you are all bona fide bankruptcy attorneys with the chops to see somebody through effectively in a Chapter 7 bankruptcy case. Yeah. It is just unfortunate truth, though, that when the economy takes a downturn like it is doing right now, a lot of folks who find their other practice areas drying up will flock into bankruptcy. That's probably why NACPA saw 300 new members in 1 week, as I think we mentioned earlier in the presentation. So it's a challenge.
Yeah, but I would add to that. So we actually do have good materials on marketing that we'll share with you. Like, a lot of it was developed in my practice, but a lot of it also has been fine-tuned talking with other attorneys around the country. So the marketing, and part of the reason these personal injury firms that are going to be switching over to bankruptcy are effective is that they're good at marketing. They have the experience and the knowledge, and they know how to do it. So we have both third parties that we can suggest you talk with who can help you, and we also have internal resources that we can share with you. But there's definitely ways to deal with marketing to make sure yours is efficient and is conveying the right message that you are, a more experienced and more effective attorney than perhaps somebody who just started.
So Kathleen asks, can we get the citations for the case law you referenced? And the answer is absolutely. So we have a section of our website called Fresh Start University. And if you reach out to us, we can get you into that password protected area. It's got copies of all of our articles, the case law summary. I've got a really thorough unpublished article that's kind of a longer form treatment of the entire history of bifurcation from a legal and an ethical perspective. And those resources are absolutely available to you.
Yep.
So Frank asks about the actual financing terms, how we get paid, who bears the risk of the debtor's non-payment. So really this gets to that distinction that I talked about with the other company that was operating in this space before that actually bought receivables from attorneys and factored them, which is unfortunately a form of fee sharing. Because of that problem, we structure this as a recourse line of credit. So the credit is being extended to your firm, and you're able to draw down on that line of credit each time you offer post-petition payment terms to your clients. And the way in which you do that's very simple. You upload the engagement agreement, a payment authorization form, some proof of income, or in our current situation, proof of potentially some unemployment benefits, and proof of the bankruptcy filing through an online portal that's super easy to use. We very quickly turn that around. We've got a very kind of light touch underwriting process. And if you submit a draw request to us and it's processed by Tuesday, you see the funding in your bank account on Friday. If it's processed and approved by Friday, you see it on Tuesday. We fund twice a week like clockwork through ACH deposits into your account. And then once we do take on that draw or that post-petition engagement, then we take over as your agent to manage the payments.
Yeah.
And we apply the payments against the indebtedness.
But we have built-in features though to protect the attorney. So rather than getting into all that detail right now, please call us and we'll get into all the detail that you want on it and really explain how it works.
Yeah, we've actually set up a structure that, as Matt said, protects folks from the recourse nature of the debt. And I will tell you, in our 2+ year history of financing these cases, working with hundreds of attorneys across the country, we've never had an attorney get stuck with, a debtor not having paid their bill. There's a really interesting kind of structure built into it that really protects all of us. Tracy asked, are there any states that you found very hostile to the bifurcation process? And I would say it's not a matter of hostility. There's still some pockets, districts around the country that are just unfamiliar with this. Matt will tell you that there are districts around the country where this has become just the predominant method of structuring Chapter 7 engagements, and there are thousands of cases being filed this way.
There's some states that are split. They maybe have a judge in one district that still has some questions about it, and the other district in the same state that's, they embrace it because they see the benefits to the debtors. But at the end of the day, it's really about educating anybody who has some preconceived notions that this is somehow bad for the debtors, because this is not bad for debtors whatsoever. It's very good for the debtors.
Yeah. And, the case law has developed and continues to develop in a very favorable way around this. And, we can talk to you more about those details once we know where you're at. We do kind of catalog information about different parts of the country and where there are trustees that still have questions or concerns, and where, it's essentially been accepted and there's just an effort to try and make sure you're doing it correctly.
Yep.
So let's see, we've got a number of questions. We're probably going to have to shorten some of this up.
Quite a few. Yeah, so I guess we're running over here. I guess what I would encourage you guys to do is to call in, and then we can spend more time with you really diving into the questions. Unless you see something that's a quick answer.
Well, there's a couple of quick ones that maybe we'll touch on as we close here. So Todd asked, is the pre-petition services just the skeleton petition? And the answer is yes, with the very big proviso that you still have to complete your diligence. That's something that we take very seriously. I mean, you're not just signing up a debtor and filing their petition and then worrying about whether or not they qualify, whether it's in their best interest, or whether there are problems like preference payments or fraudulent conveyances lurking out there, or potentially even something as simple as a tax refund or something like that ought to be dealt with before the case is filed. So you've got to complete that diligence through a robust consultation, a good intake questionnaire, getting documents, and pulling credit. But yes, you do typically see attorneys who follow this practice deferring the preparation of the schedules and statements until after the petition's filed, which, as I think you all know, is allowed under Rule 1007 that provides those documents can be filed up to 14 days after the petition is filed.
Yeah. I see someone asked if we can finance the filing fee, and the answer is yes.
Yeah, we won't get into the details here because it's a bit technical, but yeah, we can absolutely talk to you about that. Here's another quick question from Todd too. How many people never sign the second agreement, but yet an attorney is still on the hook for the representation? Matt, you filed hundreds of cases this way.
Boy, it's not even 1%. So I found in my practice with a high volume, some people would just disappear. So it had nothing to do with the bifurcated case. It could be a normal case. They never attend their 341. You can never get a hold of them again. I never knew what happened to them. Did they go to jail? Did they move away? I mean, who knows? So those people are still not going to sign the second agreement because they wouldn't have completed a regular Chapter 7 either. But it's a fraction of a percent. The reality is when someone hires you, they like you. And there's no way they can finish the case by themselves. And so they will always come back and sign that second agreement because, again, they like you, they trust you, and they want you to help them get their discharge. So it's just a non-issue.
All right, so I guess the last question that we'll handle, and there are a number we've not gotten to, and I apologize, but we're very serious about wanting to answer all your questions. So when you see the contact information, reach out. As I said, you'll get an email from us following up on the webinar that'll have some information in it. Matt and I want to make sure we answer any and all of your questions that we can. But Jesse asks, it seems that client education and informed consent is key here, correct? And yes, that is the absolute touchdown. And as I've dealt with these issues across the country, either speaking to U.S. trustees' offices or going in and educating judges in hearings about the process, disclosing clearly to the client what their options are and getting their informed consent is perhaps the single most important piece of the puzzle. So we'll leave it with that. We want to thank you again for joining us today. Again, we just had a record-setting registration and attendance for this webinar, which I think, again, is indicative of the interest in the topic and the fact that everyone sees the world changing over the next several months. You'll see a slide at the end of this that's got a contact phone number and emails for Matt and I. As Matt has said a couple of times, we have folks standing by, so if you want to call in, we've got people who can answer all of your technical questions immediately. You're also welcome to email either one of us directly, and we will either respond directly or we'll get someone plugged in as quickly as we can to do that. But we look forward to working with you. This really is a win-win-win, and it's kind of a passion project for Matt and I as well. I mean, we're serious about trying to make a fresh start affordable and accessible to everyone. And there have been for a good long time a lot of people out there hurting that desperately need your help. And that situation is likely to only get worse over the ensuing several months. So let's all gear up and be ready for that surge that undoubtedly is coming.
Yeah, and I guess one thing that's kind of what's underlying a lot of the things we talked about today, though, is that we also are trying to raise the bar in terms of the practice by Chapter 7 attorneys. I mean, a lot of Chapter 7 attorneys don't get help in terms of how to do it. It's a very complicated area that a lot of people don't necessarily appreciate. And that's why we do have, world-class forms, fee agreements, disclosures, everything. I mean, there's none better than what we have. And we're happy to share those with you and make sure you're doing things correctly.
All right, so I think that'll wind it up for today. We look forward to talking to those of you whose questions we weren't able to answer, and hope that we can be of help to you as you integrate this option into your practice and set yourself up to help more people. Thanks, and have a great afternoon.
Yeah, thanks, everyone.